Welcome back to my channel for another Hasselblad episode, and this video is all about the brand new, just announced Hasselblad X2D 100c. And when Hasselblad announced this camera just a couple of days back, it triggered a lot of enthusiasm in the Hasselblad community among the photographers. And the reason is simple: this is really a worthy successor for the Hasselblad X1D Mark II. It has a brand new sensor, it has more features. Well, some features are dropped, we'll come to that in a moment. And it also comes with brand new lenses. And here I have currently mounted the XCD55, which is a new lens. We come to that in a moment with, manual focusing and a distance scale, depth of field. Finally with an aperture ring here, as we are used to from Leica. And I also did shoot it already with the 38mm XCD lens, and that is another fantastic wide angle lens. And first of all, to get the housekeeping right, I want to thank the nice people from Light and Bite in Zurich. This is the largest camera gadget photography store you find in the area, and they gave this camera to me for free over the weekend to test it out, to shoot it, which I did intensely, of course. And it also came in a nice bag, which you see here in the background, with a Hasselblad promotion pen, with a cleaning towel here for lenses and the camera body, with the newest brochure from Hasselblad on their lineup here on the X series, and also with a box, so we'll look into that in a moment, what's the shipping content. I will now clean up the mess in front of me on the table, and then we have a very detailed look into that new camera here, into the new lenses. We'll compare it with the Hasselblad X1D Mark II and also with other cameras. We'll find analogies to other camera brands, and of course I also will show my sample images from the first shooting. Let's get started. The box in which the X2D is shipped is a very, very nice box. So you see here an engraving, and in terms of content, let's briefly look into it. So here, by the way, is something that belongs to the lenses. So here is some carve out. That's the way the camera body was placed in the box. Then if we lift this up, we have here something to lift up. And then we have the usual boxes. So we have here, let me quickly go into that. We have here a manual, I guess. Here we go. That's just paper. That's a warranty leaflet. Then we have here in the box what's shipped in the box, and we have here safety guidelines, and we have here a quick start guide and something in Chinese on the back side. Thank you for choosing Hasselblad. That's what's in this tiny little box here. And let's see what else is in the box. Let me lift this up again. So we have here, I guess, a shoulder strap. I'm not sure I really need to unpack this here. So that's a shoulder strap here. Then we have in the box, I guess, here. Let's see what's inside here. That was where the battery was in. That battery is in the camera by now. Yes, there is a charger inside here. So if we go here inside, we have a charger. This is the charger. It looks kind of the same as what we had before on the Hasselblad X1D Mark II. And then there is one last box in here, which we also need to quickly open. And here we get a USB-C to USB-C cable. And that's it. That's the content of the box. Let's quickly check here in the brochure. I think we had the content which was shipped. And let's quickly have a look what's inside here. So what do they say? Yes, we have the camera, we have the battery, we have the charger, we have the USB-C cable, we have the shoulder strap, and we have the battery protection. And that's it. That's all that's in the box. I have now in front of me on the table the X2D and the X1D Mark II. And first of all, if you put them side by side, there are tiny little differences on the camera body. So first of all, the X2D 100c is a little bit larger in terms of dimensions than the X1D Mark II 50c. The display size looks kind of comparable. I didn't really check exactly the dimensions, but on the X1D Mark II, you had here a spare out or carve out, whereas on the X2D, you actually have here full sight of the display. And I also applied a protector already so that I don't have fingerprints here, and also I avoid reflections. The grip on the X2 is a bit more curved, and I think actually that it is nicely in hand. As I said, I was shooting already with that camera, and it's really nice in hand, and I like a lot the design they have here. And in general, the color of the metal finish here is a bit darker than what we had on the X1D Mark II, and it looks beautiful. It is a really, really beautiful camera here. The control elements also changed. So first of all, if we look at the two cameras from the top, we have the same color on the shutter release button, but here on the X2D we have an H engraved, and that looks nice and beautiful. I also think the reaction of the shutter release button is very nice. From a mechanical perspective, really fine art what Hasselblad is delivering here. The buttons on the rear side of the camera, they are almost the same, but we have here on the X2D 4 buttons, and we used to have 5 buttons on the X1D Mark II. But I actually didn't really notice when I was shooting, because intuitively, if you are used to shoot X1D Mark II, you can easily shoot the X2D. And we'll also see this in the menu in a moment, that there are lots of similarities. This is really a natural evolution with a huge step forward in terms of sensor, image stabilization, and autofocus. So we'll come to that in a moment. Also, the on-off switch is placed on the same position as before and looks kind of the same. But what we miss here is on the X1D Mark II, we have here a mode dial. So for aperture priority, manual mode, shutter priority, all of that. And we don't have that any longer on the X2D, but here we get instead a top display. And that is very useful because essential information is displayed here and you have easy overview about everything that's going on with your camera. We have 2 buttons here on both cameras at the top side, but here we have different engravings and the functionality is slightly different. We have the same control wheels here. This is the rear control wheel. And we also have the same front control wheel here and here. So in terms of handling, as I said, shooting the X2D when you're on X1D Mark II or X1D shooter is just a piece of cake. It's so easy in terms of workflow. Another difference gets revealed when we open here the side compartments. So here we have 2 SD card slots on the X1D Mark II. And here we have, USB-C port and then headphone and so on. And on the X2D that changed. So if I open this here, we have 1 USB-C port, works quite well for image transfer and for tethered shooting. I looked into that already. And here you have only 1 card slot, and that's actually for a compact flash express card type B. So you don't have 2 card slots here any longer, but you don't need it because the X2D has internal memory. So an internal SSD with 1 terabyte, which is huge for a camera. And you can use and couple and kind of combine the compact flash card and the internal SSD storage in the same way as if you would have 2 cards like you have it in the X1D Mark II with 2 SD cards. Compact flash express cards are much faster than what you currently achieve on SD cards. And I have one here in the studio, which I will insert into this camera body here. So that's from Agfa-Photo, and it has a read speed of 1700 megabit per second and a write speed of 1200 megabit per second. That cannot be achieved as of today with an SD card, and that's why more and more camera manufacturers actually switch to compact flash express cards with different types, of course, depending on what brand you are looking into. So if we take the compact flash express card out of the storage box and open here the X2D, we can insert this, and I guess it goes this way. No, it's the other way. All right. Then it snaps in, and now I have internal SSD storage and the compact flash express storage here. In the design of the new X2D, Hasselblad actually borrowed a few ideas from other manufacturers. And the first one, which was eye-catching for me, is that new lens cap here. Let me get this off. And when I saw this the first time, I thought that is something I've seen before. It's a very good metal finish lens cap here. Let me get this on again. And I've seen this before on a camera I still have here in the studio, but I haven't shot for a long time. It's the Sony RX1R Mark II. And here you have the same thing. Let's get this off. Isn't that a surprising similarity and analogy we have here? It's the same thing, and it's in the same way a very valuable lens cap you have on that beautiful, very compact full-frame camera with a high-resolution sensor. So here I think there is something Hasselblad borrowed from Sony, And I think the second idea they borrowed is the internal SSD. So we have this 1 terabyte SSD here, and then we have one card slot here, as I mentioned before, and that can be combined for overflow function or backup function or what have you. And the same idea was earlier incorporated when at the beginning of 2022 Leica introduced the Leica M11, because here we have 64 gigabyte internal storage and we have one SD card, and that can be combined in the same way as on the Hasselblad X2D now. So some analogies and similarities we see here to features which have been implemented by other manufacturers before in their cameras. Let's now switch the camera on. Let's boot it up here with the Hasselblad logo. And now we are here, and if you look at that LCD screen, let me go into an image I just took today. And this is a 3.6 inch TFT type screen, 24-bit full color, 2.36 million dot. So quite nice. You have a lot of oversight here. If you zoom in here, you can see all the details. It looks really good. It is a really good screen in my opinion. And on the top display, where you get the essential information, as I mentioned before, we have a 1.08 inch TFT type display, 18-bit full color, which is rich. In many cases, like in the Fuji GFX series, for instance, that is a monochrome display. And you actually have here 158,400 dots. And when I was shooting the camera, I actually used most of the time the electronic viewfinder here for checking image quality after the shot. And that's an OLED screen, 5.76 million dots and 100% viewing area. So really nice, really rich. I want to show two more things on the camera body, and the first is the flip screen, and that was on the wish list of many Hasselblad X shooters, and we can now get this out here. There is one position where it snaps in, and there is a second position where it snaps in. And if you are shooting from a low position, low at the ground, you have actually full sight of your display, and that is quite nice. And the second remark I want to do concerns the battery, so let's switch this off. And the battery mechanism is the same as what we had before on the X1D and the X1D Mark II. We have a little lever here, I can push it, but then the battery cannot accidentally drop off. I have to give it another gentle push, and then I can remove it. And now let's take the battery from the X1D Mark II, which is an older battery. Let's get this out in the same way. Now I can insert it in the X2D. And then it immediately shows me here on the top display that battery is 100% charged. So I can switch it on and can operate the camera with the batteries I already have from the X1D or the X1D Mark II. And that's quite nice. And of course the battery from the X2D, which is shipped in the box, fits in the same way into the X1D Mark II and operates the camera. Next, let's talk about the sensor. And in the X1D Mark II, we have a brilliant 50 megapixel sensor. You've seen this camera so many times on my channel, and every time I was excited about the image quality and most importantly about Hasselblad's natural color science, which I like a lot. And now here we have a huge upgrade. So let's quickly switch it off. And let's also unmount the lens for a moment. So let's turn this around. So this huge beast here now has 100 megapixel, actually 102 megapixels effectively, and that means 11.6K times 8.7K pixels. And we have a pixel size of 3.76 micron. And the sensor dimension is the usual dimension of a crop medium format sensor. So we talk here about give or take 44 times 33 millimeter. I think precisely it's actually 43.8 times 32.9. And that is a crop medium format sensor. It's not the huge size of 53.4 millimeter times 40 millimeter you get in a Hasselblad H6D, but it is substantially larger than a full frame sensor. And the crop factor, if you want to compare it with a full frame equivalent setup, is 0.79, as it used to be on the Hasselblad X1D Mark II, and as it also is on the Fuji GFX 100s. If the camera is switched off and you shake the camera body a little bit, you see the sensor moving, and that's because here finally we have now in-body image stabilization along 5 axes, and you can gain up to 7 stops. We'll look into that in a moment with a little experiment. Since the mode dial, which was there on the X1D and the X1D Mark II, but now had to move away for the top display here, is no longer there, we need to find other ways to switch mode. And one way is to go to the touchscreen. So you just swipe down here in the same way as we did on the predecessors of that new camera. And then you have here aperture priority. and you can switch into manual mode, for instance. That is super easy. But we also have now here at the top side a dedicated button for that. So here's the M button, which is for mode. If I push that, the top display shows the different shooting modes. Let's go here to manual mode. Then we have aperture priority, shutter speed priority, program mode, and full auto mode. And that works also in the same way. If you don't need that because you want to work with touch, so you go here and choose your shooting mode here, then you can also customize this button here, and that's done in the menu. I quickly show that. So we go into the menu, we go into general, then we go into custom buttons, and currently exposure mode is allocated to the M button, but I can also choose a different function here if I want. So I could also choose here ISO settings or the drive mode, you know, my level metering, we are spirit level, Wi-Fi on off, whatever I want. I think exposure mode is good. I keep it that way for the moment, but you can customize it, and that's nice. Let's play with image stabilization for a moment. So I've here set an ISO of 400 for the lighting we have in the room, widest open f2.5, and I want to shoot this at 1/100 seconds. So let's get my model here into focus. You also get focus confirmation. You can also tweak this in the menu here, but currently I have here the big beep, so listen to that. Here we go. Let's take a shot. And now if we zoom in here into that picture, and that's my first impression from that camera, everything is super sharp, super crisp, absolutely fantastic in terms of Hasselblad's natural color science, looks very natural, and is also super clean if you look into that image. ISO 400, well, should not be super noisy, but looks really good. And now if we have 1/100 seconds, let's quickly count the stops. I don't want to do all the full 7 stops because that experiment typically never works. But let's say we want to make this 5 stops slower now. So if we come from 1/100 seconds and we go 1 full stop slower, then we actually should go to 1/50. That's the first stop. Second stop is 1/25, then 1/13, let's say, then 1/6. And then we go for 0.3 seconds, which is 1/3 seconds. And now let's try to do this handhold. Of course, it's not overexposed, so we can close the aperture here a bit to compensate for that. Let's go here to f11. And now let me try to handhold shoot this here. So here we go. Let's zoom in. Let's have a look. Well, this is still crisp and sharp. You see here, no tripod use. So you know, we can here gain quite some stops with that in-body image stabilization, and that is quite useful, of course, in a low light environment. You will get motion blurriness, of course, if you get slower, but you know, for still images and scenes which are in low light and you want to capture this handhold, you have pretty good chances with that image stabilization that the image will still be crisp and sharp, even if you do this handhold with a much slower shutter speed. I want to show sample images later because I did shoot this camera intensely already, but we talk here about 16-bit in the color definition, dynamic range up to 15 stops. That's absolutely brilliant. And the image size, of course, given this is 100 megapixels, is quite large. So if you have the usual RAW file coming in the Hasselblad setup, you actually have to carry around 206 megabyte on average. And then of course you go into post-processing, you can resize it, make it smaller for social media, what have you. That's all no problem, but you need to have some storage if you want to shoot that camera in full resolution in RAW. 206 megabyte on average per image in the RAW format. I got familiar with the buttons very quickly. So for instance, here we have the ISO, and if I press that, I get my ISO settings. So here's ISO, simple like that. We can go up to 25,600 ISO. That's end of story, but that's plenty of headroom. And the native ISO value actually here is an ISO of 64. And with that little button here, I can just access that easy like that. If I push it a second time, I get white balance. But again, I can customize this in the menu in the same way as I was just shown it for the M button, so for the mode button here. If you want to move your autofocus point, you can just do this by touch. You see this follows my finger here, easy like that. Let me do this here with the pointing finger. Quite easy, but if you're used to using the rear and the front wheel for that, you can also get this done by setting it up in the menu. And by the way, if I push the X here, it goes back to the center position. So I can place it somewhere. Here it goes back in the center position. So let's quickly go into the menu to show that. We go into general and then we go into custom buttons, and currently the wheel click here, that's the rear wheel click, is for zooming in. So if I'm clicking it, it zooms in, and you know, I can, let's get this sharp, let's zoom in, here we go, Yennefer from the Witcher saga. And if I change this now, I go here into general, then custom buttons, and then instead of zooming in, I say here, for instance, I want to have move autofocus point. So if I choose that, I can now push the button here, and then you see now I can move it in the vertical direction with the rear wheel and in horizontal direction with the front wheel. So quite nice. So you can customize this camera in many ways, and I think the touch functionality is in general pragmatic, but if you want to use mechanical elements like you did use it before on the X1D Mark II maybe, then here is your chance. As we've seen already when I played with the camera and showed here and there certain items in the menu, it is pretty similar to the X1D Mark II. So you swipe down, you get quick access to your settings here, for instance metering. We can say we want to have spot here, then it's spot metering or what have you. We can also go for center weighted, for instance. We also did access here the mode on the shooting mode, and you have all kinds of options here what you can use. We have auto exposure lock here. You see then here a little icon coming up. See, it's coming here, and then I can push it away. So in spot metering, I can meter light somewhere else and then recompose. That's quite convenient. And in general, also the buttons work in the same way. One push on that button here gives you the oversight screen, and then another button gives you all the menu options. And you can choose here what currently suits you. Let me make another example. For instance, here in focus, you can set a few parameters. First of all, you could say here autofocus point size, small or large if you want it, but you can again also find a dedicated button for that if that is what you want. And let's make this quickly transparent here how it works. We go again into settings and general and custom buttons, and you know, again, maybe you want to use the click wheel here, and then you could say here, let's go there, autofocus point cycle size, and if we choose that, you know, we can now switch with the rear control wheel by pushing it from large to small, from small to large, and so on. So again, a lot of customization possible here. Another, in my opinion, absolutely essential feature you find here under storage, and I have chosen here primary slot SSD, but since I now have the compact flash card in there, I could also say this is the compact flash express. And then, and that's very important for me, if I do a professional shooting, I don't want to have overflow, I want to have backup. Because then, you know, first place where my images will get stored is on the compact flash card here, but I get always a backup on the internal SSD. And if my card would break down, I still have copies, well, full resolution copies on my internal SSD on the X2D, and that is quite nice. You also get here information how much storage you have still available. So currently 977 gigabyte. As I said, full capacity is 1 terabyte. Is really a lot of headroom in terms of storage. In case you need reading glasses, because your eyes are not the best any longer in the world, you will stumble into a very innovative feature here. So if you go into display, you typically have here a wheel or here a wheel for diopter control. And that's no longer here, because here this is controlled in a totally different, totally innovative way. So if you go into EVF diopter, it says look into the EVF, and I do this now, try to film through the electronic viewfinder, and then I use the rear control wheel to adjust the diopter. Have a look here. See, Victor, that's the first name from Mr. Hasselblad, and now I can use the control wheel and change my diopter setting so that it finally works for my own eyes. And that is super innovative. I've not seen anything like that before. What I really appreciated when shooting the camera is that the autofocus system is much more spot on now, and it will only be more spot on with these new XCD lenses, because face detection autofocus is not supported by the former XCD lenses, but we are going to try in a moment a former XCD lens on this new camera body. But have a look here, this is really speedy now compared to the hunting forth and back we saw in quite some videos on my channel on the X1D Mark II. So have a look here. This is much faster now than it used to be. It's still by far not a match for the Fuji GF X100s. And by the way, maybe also mentioning two things which I found a bit disturbing is we still don't have here focus tracking, we still don't have body and face detection, or maybe even eye detection. And that's all included, of course, on the Fuji GF X100s, including a pretty well working focus tracking. Here you have nothing in terms of tracking. You just have to control your focus field place it on the face of your model, and then maybe recompose, what have you. And so this is really minimalistic, but it's also not in the spirit of the typical Hasselblad cameras if you think about their legacy. But clearly, the big competitor of this camera is the GFX 100S, and here you have it all. And the second feature which was dropped is the former X1D Mark II had video capabilities only 2.5K, so nothing really to write home about, whereas the Fuji GFX 100S has full 4K. But here in this camera, video has been completely dropped. So there is no video functionality any longer here, although you see here still the holes which used to be the microphones, if I'm not mistaken here, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there is no video capability on this camera. And again, this is in line with the spirit of Hasselblad cameras being a medium format instrument for professional photographers, but not really serving the videographer community. By the way, switching from autofocus to manual focus is now super easy on these new lenses, because here you just pull up here the ring and then you get here a scale for precise manual focusing. And if you try to listen here, you hear that nice sound, because that is a very good mechanism here. It is really cool. And so these lenses, they have all the same mechanism. If you look at the 38mm lens here, it's the same. We just pull this ring up and then we get a distance scale and also a depth of field indication here, like we know it from Leica lenses and from many legacy brands. And legacy lenses is a bit old school, but is still what I like most if I purchase a lens, if I get these type of scales. And we also have here, I mentioned this before, an aperture ring, but this ring can also be customized for something else. So if you look here, if I turn it, let me go here, maybe then we have it bigger. So here I stop down now, then I open it to its widest setting, 2.5, and that's all done by the ring here. But I can again in the menu customize that ring here for some other function if I want, and then just use here touch functionality. So there is again a lot of flexibility how you steer and control that camera. What I also like in particular in the Hasselblad system is that we have a leaf shutter in the lens. And here now the fastest is 1/4000 seconds. And if you think about the most professional Hasselblad digital camera, which is the H6D, these lenses only have 1/2000 seconds. Here we have 1/4000 seconds, and you can sync your flash at all speeds, even at 1/4000 seconds. And then we have also an electronic shutter, and the electronic shutter of course is much faster. We can go to 1/6000 seconds here. And in terms of longer exposure, you can with the XCD lenses go for 68 minutes exposure time. That is plenty of headroom, even for nightographers who want to have the night sky, the Milky Way and what have you, and probably have an astro tracker to get the stars pinpoint sharp. Lots of possibilities here how you can use that camera. Last but not least, before I go into a few sample images to show you what you can do with this new 100 megapixel sensor, let's quickly unmount the lens here, because there is something I want to show. So let's place this here. And if you look at the lens mount here, you have here a rubber sealing, and the camera body is as robust as the X1D Mark II, and you also have full weather sealing. So this camera will not let you down in difficult shooting conditions and maybe a more nasty environment than just sunny blue sky weather. And what I want to do now is I want to mount a former XCD lens, and I've chosen for this little experiment here the 35 to 75mm is a lens I use very often for beauty and fashion shootings, because it gives me a lot of flex, and actually the image quality at each of these focal lengths is almost as if you would use a prime lens, so I like it a lot. Let's mount this here. Let's see how this works on the new camera body. Here we go. Then we switch it on, because most of us have these XCD lenses and will not immediately get, based on the long delivery times from Hasselblad, these new XCD lenses. So let's see if this is working. Let's get the lens cap off. For the time being looks good. Let's go into the menu quickly. And then in the menu, let's quickly see here on the stabilization, and see it recognizes here focal length 35mm. Let's change this here and let's see if this gets adapted. Beautiful, it works, see? And that's important because you need the focal length information in the camera body to get the in-body image stabilization right. And it just works like a charm here. Let's go to 70, and then this is 75. So this is really cool. It works. Let's see how the autofocus is working. Actually, quite quick. I'm surprised how quick this is. Works really good. I also checked if these Former XCD lenses need a firmware update, but it's still the same version as before. Hasselblad has not published anything yet, but it works. So that means if you purchase the camera body only, you can safely use all the XCD lenses you used before on the X1D Mark II or the 907X camera body, and that is quite nice. So Hasselblad made sure, and that's what they always do. That's a great thing about Hasselblad, that, you know, whatever you purchased years or decades back can still be used in a modern digital setup. And I just published some time back a video about the Hasselblad 500 with a digital back, and it works like a charm. So that is good, and I think that's the last thing I wanted to show on the camera body. As said, if there is interest, drop me a comment. I'm happy to do a full tutorial, everything you need to know about that new camera. I can also do a tips and tricks videos. There are so many things to discover here, and some of these are really hidden in the menu. So drop me a comment if you want to see that in the next weeks. Now let's look into sample images, and then I conclude the video. Let's have a closer look at the image quality this new 100 megapixel sensor is delivering. And by the way, it's a backside illuminated CMOS sensor. So here is the first shot I wanted to show, and if I crop into 100%, this is absolutely fantastic. So this is super clean, super crisp, and of course you have now double the resolution than what you had on the X1D Mark II. So here absolutely nothing to complain. It was a bit of a dramatic day in terms of clouds when I did the shooting here, and that comes across very well, of course, based on the Hasselblad natural color science. Here another image shot in beautiful Switzerland, Canton Schwyz, and the exposure time here is 1/80 seconds. It's shot at an f8.0 and an ISO of 200. And the effective resolution, I think I mentioned that before, is 101.9 megapixel, so you could call this a 102 megapixel resolution here. And cropping in by 100%, this is mind-blowingly sharp. Absolutely brilliant what this sensor is delivering. Nothing less I expected, because the X1D Mark II is already a very sharp camera when it comes to the sensor and image quality, but this is just one level beyond here. And I think it's great how these images look like. I like a lot the way the color is presented. Again, is a very natural representation of the scene in front of the camera, and the sharpness, if you look at that, is absolutely fantastic. Here another image in the same location, and here I opened the aperture wide as possible to f2.5. It's an ISO of 64, and I just wanted to show how the background blurriness looks here on this new 55mm XCD lens. And if I crop in here by 100%, again you see mind-blowing sharpness, but you also see nicely how the background is blurred out, and that is clearly an effect you achieve by opening the aperture to its widest setting of f2.5. Here I wanted to go for another panorama stitching, and this is frame number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then stitched together in Lightroom, some post-processing at the end, and then I ended up with 243.4 megapixel here. Again, color representation, very nice, level of detail, absolutely fantastic. And by the way, the angle of view for this new 55mm lens in a full frame equivalent focal length or field of view would be 43mm, so it's a bit more narrow than if you go for a typical wide angle lens, and that's why handhold panorama shooting here really is an option to catch more content and a wider field of view if you stitch together 5 frames later in post. Here the other panorama stitching I showed quickly in the clip I played before, so this has 6 frames here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then ends up in a 300 megapixel image. Absolutely fantastic. I like a lot the way this comes across, and you can go easily here for these panorama stitchings and create I don't know how many 100 megapixel if you want, and it just works very, very well. Again, look at the other side of the lake, the details you have in these small villages along the shore of the lake. Here a couple of other images. This is along the bridge here which crosses the lake. Very nice image, I think. Also a lot of detail if you look into that image and crop in by 100%. Here we have another HDR image which I took. I think that's the final one here. Here another one from a different perspective. Again, a lot of details in these frames. Here an image of the bridge, which I personally like a lot. We have some motion blurriness here with that car crossing the bridge, but the bridge itself is pinpoint sharp. Very nice. And here a slightly different perspective. And you can cross that bridge, and there are so many places here in Switzerland where you can take nice photos, and clearly is an Eldorado to try out this new Hasselblad X2D and the new lenses. And I guess in the next weeks I will very likely dig deeper into these two new lenses. I hopefully also get my hands on the 90mm lens, and will also look into lots of other things to explore on that camera, because what I showed in this video is just the tip of the iceberg. I need to learn more about the readout time of the sensor when it comes to electronic shutter. I need to look more closely into dynamic range, and you know, you will hear again from me about that new camera very soon. I hope you liked that video and it was useful for you and gave you a first glimpse into a fantastic new camera for medium format shooters. And you know, it is a huge upgrade compared to the X1D Mark II, what we get here. And congratulations to Hasselblad for making that step and providing to us this brand new camera with 3 new lenses. The 90mm lens I have not shot yet, but the 38mm I did shoot. The 55mm, that's actually currently my favorite lens. I really like the field of view and the way the lens is transporting the light towards the camera sensor. And you know, we have a huge upgrade here. We have a few things missing. Autofocus is much better on the X2D compared to the X1D Mark II, but still no tracking, no body and face detection, definitely no eye detection. And you know, you will have to get used to it if you are used to a camera before, which has these tracking functions. And the second feature we lost on the X2D is video capability. Now I should say I never used video on the Hasselblad X1D Mark II. If I really want to go into videography and shoot videos, I have better cameras here to do that. Like a Sony Alpha 1, or if it is medium format, the Fuji GF X100S or the Nikon C9. There are so many options. I don't use Hasselblad cameras for video, so I'm fine with it. But for people who want to have this camera as their one and only camera, that might be a flaw, that you have no video capabilities at all. If you liked that video, don't forget to drop me a thumbs up. Stay tuned on my channel, there's always more to come. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and healthy, and of course, peace out.